Hello children, do you like stories? Today, let's read and enjoy a story. The name of the story is The Shepherd's Treasure. The story, The Shepherd's Treasure, is an Iranian folklore in which a wise and honest shepherd is rewarded by the king for his honesty, wisdom, and goodness. The purpose of this story is to guide students and help them to realize the significance of maintaining kindness, humility, wisdom, and sympathy for others. This story throws light upon the importance of human values like honesty, wisdom, and humanity. By following such high values and principles, a shepherd became a governor. Okay, let's read the story. The Shepherd's Treasure. In a village in Iran, there once lived a shepherd. He was very poor. He didn't even have a small cottage of his own. He had never been to school or learned to read and write, for there were very few schools in those days. Who is shepherd? Shepherd means person who takes care of the sheep. Cottage means a small house. Here, a poor shepherd lived in Iran. He was so poor that he didn't even have a small house. Because of less number of schools during those days, he could never attend school to read and write. See the next paragraph. Though poor and uneducated, this shepherd was very wise. He understood people's sorrow and troubles and helped them face their problems with courage and common sense. Many people came to him for advice. Soon he became famous for his wisdom and friendly nature. The king of that country heard about him and thought of meeting him. Then, in spite of his poverty and illiteracy, this shepherd was very wise. He was able to understand people's pains and often helped them to solve their issues with courage and wisdom. People used to visit him to find suggestions and solutions. Because of this ability, he became popular. His popularity reached the king as well and he thought of meeting him. Then see the next paragraph. Disguised as a shepherd and riding on a mule, one day the king came to the cave where the wise shepherd lived. As soon as the shepherd saw the traveler coming towards the cave, he rose to welcome him. He took the tired traveler inside the cave, gave him water to drink and a share of his own meager meal. The king rested for the night in the cave and was greatly impressed by the shepherd's hospitality and wise conversation. Disguised means an appearance that hides the actual form. Then what's the meaning of mule? Do you know what is mule? Mule is an offspring of a male ass and a female horse. Then meager means inadequate, quite less in amount. Hospitality, it means act of being friendly and warm reception. These are the new words in this paragraph. Dressed as a shepherd and hiding his true identity, the king reached the shepherd's cave on a mule. The moment the shepherd noticed him coming to his cave, he got up to greet him. He brought the traveler inside his cave and gave him water and food. The king took rest and stayed with him for the night in the cave. The king was impressed by his friendly, warm reception and words of wisdom. Okay, then see the next paragraph. Though still tired, the king decided to depart the next morning. He said, "Many thanks for your kindness to a poor traveler. I have a long way to go. Permit me to live." Looking straight into the eyes of his guest, the shepherd replied, Thank you, Your Majesty, for paying me the compliment of a visit. Compliment means what? An expression of appreciation. Though the king was still feeling tired, yet he decided to leave from the place the very next morning. He expressed his gratitude to the poor shepherd for his warm and kind welcome. He sought his permission to leave the place. The shepherd addressed the king as Your Majesty, and looking straight into his eyes expressed his gratitude. See the next paragraph. Let's see what's going to happen. The king was astonished as well as pleased. He is indeed very wise. He thought to himself, I need people like him to work for me. And the king appointed this humble shepherd the governor of a small district. Although he rose to power and dignity, the shepherd remained as humble as ever. People loved and honored him for his wisdom, sympathy, and goodness. He was kind and just to one and all. His fame as a fair and wise governor soon spread throughout the country. The king was astonished. Astonished means wondered. And he was very pleased. He became happy. The king was wondering and was full of joy to hear his words. He thought that the shepherd was actually very wise. The people like him were the need of the king. He must work for the king. And the king made him the governor of a small district. In spite of all the power and dignity, the shepherd remained humble and modest. People liked him and were full of appreciation for his wisdom and kindness. His behavior was just to everyone. He became popular as a good and wise governor. Humble means not proud but modest. Okay, see the next paragraph. Now the governors of other provinces grew terribly jealous of him. Provinces, that means states, and began to talk to the king against him. They said, he is very dishonest and keeps for himself part of the money that he collects as tax from the people. Why did he always carry with him? They added, an iron chest. Perhaps he carried in it the treasure that he had secretly collected. After all, they said mockingly, he was an ordinary shepherd and could behave no better. Mockingly means making fun of. The governors of other states developed jealousy for him. It's natural. They started speaking against him to the king. They started calling him dishonest and blamed him for keeping part of the tax money with him. They even posed questions over his iron chest. They said that it had all the treasure he had collected secretly. They made fun of him, calling him a common shepherd who was expected to behave in such a dishonest manner. Did the king believe them? I don't know. Let's see. At first, the king didn't pay attention to these reports, but how long could he ignore these governors and their endless stories about the shepherd? One thing was certain, the king discovered. The new governor did carry an iron chest with him all the time. Then initially the king paid no attention to such words, but gradually he had to. He didn't believe that the governor carried an iron chest with him. He thought that he must inquire about the reason for carrying an iron chest with him all the time. So, one day, the new governor was summoned to the palace. He came riding on his camel, and to everyone's delight, the famous iron chest was there, fastened securely behind him on the camel's back. Then he was summoned. Summoned means called. Thus the king called the new governor to the palace. He came on his camel. Everyone was feeling joy as the most talked about iron chest was tied behind him on the camel's back. Fastened means fixed or tied. Now the king was angry. He thundered, "Why do you always carry that iron chest with you? What does it contain?" Seeing this, the king shouted in anger and asked him the reason for carrying that iron chest with him. The other governors became very happy. But Our shepherd, the governor, smiled. He asked his servant to bring the chest. How eagerly the people standing around waited for the shepherd to be found out. But how great was their astonishment and even of the king himself when the chest was opened. No gold or silver or jewels, but an old blanket was all that came out. Holding it up proudly, the shepherd said, "This, my dear master, is my only treasure. I always carry it with me." See, my dear children, our poor shepherd. What does he show here? The governor smiled and asked his attendant to bring that chest. All the people were very curious to see and find what it had inside. But when it was opened, they found no precious gold or silver, but an old blanket. The shepherd took it in his hands with pride and explained to the king that it was his treasure. See the next paragraph. But why do you carry such an ordinary blanket with you? Surely you are the governor of a district. The king asked, to which the shepherd replied with quiet dignity, "This blanket is my oldest friend. It will still protect me if, at any time, your majesty should wish to take away my new clothes." Ordinary is very common. The meaning of clothes is a kind of clothing. Then here the king was curious to know the reason for carrying such an old blanket, to which the shepherd replied in a very dignified and respectful manner that blanket was his oldest friend. In times of need it would protect him. If the king wished, he would take his new clothing, but that blanket was very dear to him. How pleased the king was, and how embarrassed the jealous governors became to hear the wise man's reply. Now they knew that the shepherd was indeed the humblest and the wisest man in the land. The king made him the governor of a much bigger district that very day. The embarrassed governors. Embarrassed means feeling of shame and awkwardness. And indeed, in reality, the king felt very happy to hear his words. The governors were ashamed. Now, it was clear to everyone that the shepherd was the humblest and the wisest man there. Feeling proud of him, the king gave him a bigger district to look after at that very time. Children, did you like this story? Let's look at the question answers. First question is, the shepherd hadn't been to school because there were very few schools in those days. The second question is, who visited the shepherd one day and why? The king of Iran had come to visit the wise shepherd when he heard about his wisdom and friendly nature. The king disguised himself as a shepherd and riding on a mule, he came to visit the humble shepherd. Then third question is, why did the other governors grow jealous of the shepherd? The answer is, the king was pleased at the wise shepherd's warm reception and appointed him as the governor of a small district. People loved and honored him for his wisdom, sympathy, and goodness. His fame spread far and wide throughout the country. So, the governors of other provinces grew terribly jealous of him and began to talk to the king against him. Then see the next one. Why was the new governor called to the palace? The governors of other provinces were extremely jealous of the newly appointed governor, who was renowned for his wisdom, sympathy, and goodness. They poisoned the king. They poisoned the king's ears against the humble governor and reported that he was dishonest. They complained that he kept for himself part of the money in an iron chest that he collected as tax from the people. Hearing all this, finally the king called the new governor to the palace and ordered him to explain why he always carried an iron chest along with him. Okay. What's the next question? Why was everyone delighted to see the iron chest on the camel's back? Why? Everyone in the palace was delighted to see the iron chest on the camel's back because when the new governor arrived, because they thought that the iron chest contained gold, silver, and jewels in it. They knew if the king found the treasure inside the chest, Then he would dismiss the new governor of his duties and punish him for his bad deeds. Okay, what did the iron chest contain? The iron chest contained an old blanket only inside it. Why did the shepherd always carry it? The shepherd always carried an old blanket in an iron chest because it was his oldest friend. He said that it will still protect him if any day the king takes away his position and power. Then is it an example of the shepherd's humility or wisdom or both? Yes, it is an ideal example of the shepherd's humility, wisdom and goodness. See the next question. How did the king reward the new governor? The king was extremely pleased with the new governor's humility, wisdom and honesty. He immediately rewarded the wise man and promoted him to the position of a governor of a bigger district the same day. So children, let's wind up today's class. Hope all of you loved it. See you in the next class. Thank you.